Hello and welcome back to the course Private Pilot Maneuvers. Today we'll discuss flaps up landings. Now, landing without flaps is actually an abnormal maneuver in bigger airplanes like your airliners because of the very high approach speed then and the runway length that's required that is much more than with a normal landing. Now, in small airplanes actually a flaps up landing is not a big deal. I mean, there are quite a few airplanes actually that don't have flaps altogether. And of course, you can do landings with them as well. Flaps just help us to approach at a slower speed, so to have less landing distance. So if you're going to a long runway, landing without flaps in a Cessna 152, for example, is not a big deal. According to the handbook, the possible flap settings for landing are actually 0 to 30 degrees. So you can approach with flaps 0, no problem. Just keep in mind that if you were originally approaching a very short runway, you should find a longer one, because without the flaps you will have a longer landing distance. We have seen this picture already in the normal approach and landing lesson. If you're coming in without any flaps, your approach angle will be flatter, and you should also deliberately try to fly a flatter approach angle, fly a longer final approach, and reduce your speed early. Because without flaps, you have much less drag than with flaps, and it will be very hard to dissipate any excess airspeed if you're coming in too high and too fast. So don't come in too high, come in rather flat and reduce your speed early, because once you're too high and too fast, you cannot just drop the flaps because you need to keep the flaps up if they have failed, for example. So you will not be able to reduce your speed sufficiently. Keep in mind that without flaps, your landing flare, your float will be longer. So there's a tendency of the airplane to float during the flare, to need more distance because of the reduced drag. Also, you will have a much higher attitude during flare and landing because of the reduced lift. You will need to keep the nose up more. So your visibility over the nose will be worse. And it just will be an unusual picture to have the nose that high up during the flare, but that's completely normal without flaps. To make up for that loss of lift, you should approach a little bit faster without flaps. So if there is a speed in the handbook, just use that. If not, normally with small airplanes like this, like the Cessna 152, it's a good idea to fly maybe 5 to 10 knots faster, depending on your actual flap setting. Maybe you have partial flaps available, like flaps 10 or something, then you don't need to fly that much faster. But without flaps, I would say fly 10 knots faster maybe, and look for a one-way that's long enough for that increased approach speed. All right, so this concludes the briefing about flaps up landings. Let's try it. I see you in the airplane.